You know what people think kills you in a plane crash? The impact, maybe the fire, perhaps the chaos of metal tearing through the sky. Here's the thing though. Some people walk away from that nightmare, and then they face something far worse. The slow, grinding realization that they're stranded in the middle of nowhere with nothing to eat. We've all seen the survival movies. Dramatic rescues within days, heroes eating berries and catching fish, maybe rationing some airplane peanuts. But actual plane crash survivors would have traded their souls for a single pack of stale pretzels. They would have murdered someone for a warm meal that didn't make them question their humanity. Picture this, October 13th, 1972. A rugby team from Uruguay boards a plane headed to Chile. 45 people total, mostly young guys in their late teens and early 20s, excited about a game. They're joking around, probably talking about the match, completely unaware that in a few hours their entire understanding of human survival is about to get rewritten. The plane hits the Andes Mountains, not a gentle landing. We're talking about slamming into a mountain, wings tearing off, fuselage tumbling through ice and rock. 12 people die instantly. 33 survive the initial crash. They're at 11,500 feet altitude, surrounded by snow-covered peaks, temperatures dropping to negative 30 degrees Celsius at night. Most of these guys had never even seen snow before. They lived their entire lives by the sea. Here's what they had for food. 8 chocolate bars, 3 small jars of jam, a tin of mussels, a tin of almonds, a few dates, some candy, dried plums, several bottles of wine. Divide that among 33 people in freezing conditions where your body burns calories, just trying not to freeze to death. Do the math. They had maybe a week if they were careful. And here's where plane crash survival gets its first brutal lesson. They rationed everything. One survivor, Nando Parado, made a single chocolate-covered peanut last 3 days. First day, he sucked the chocolate off. Second day, he nibbled tiny bits of the peanut. Third day, he finished what was left. When that peanut was gone, there was no food left at all. Imagine being so desperate that you can make a peanut your entire world for 72 hours. The wine didn't help much either. Sure, they had bottles of it, but alcohol dehydrates you. At high altitude, where the air is already sucking moisture from your lungs with every breath, drinking wine was almost as dangerous as drinking nothing. They tried melting snow for water, which sounds simple until you realize how much energy it takes to melt enough snow to stay hydrated. They used metal sheets from the plane as solar reflectors, which worked during the day, but left them with nothing at night. By day 7, the food was gone, completely gone, and they tried everything before making the decision that would define their story. They attempted to eat the cotton stuffing from the airplane seats, made them sick. They tried eating leather from belts and luggage, even though they knew the chemicals used to treat the leather would poison them. One survivor described trying to chew strips of leather torn from luggage, knowing it was doing more harm than good. They ripped open seat cushions hoping to find straw inside anything edible. Found only foam, inedible, upholstery foam. They were so hungry they were literally trying to eat the airplane. Think about that. You're looking at aluminum, plastic, ice, and rock, trying to convince yourself that something here can keep you alive. The desperation reached a point where they were examining every scrap of material. Someone suggested they could boil the leather to make it softer, maybe extract some nutrition. They tried. It was disgusting and provided basically 0 calories. Your body expends more energy trying to digest leather than it gets from it. But when you're starving, logic doesn't matter. You're just trying anything to fill the emptiness. And if you're thinking they should have just waited for rescue, here's the horrible truth. On day 11, they found a small transistor radio wedged between 2 seats. They rigged up an antenna from electrical wire, and they heard the news. The search had been called off. The authorities had given up. Nobody was coming. They were officially dead men to the outside world. That radio broadcast did something interesting to them psychologically. Some survivors said hearing they'd been abandoned was almost liberating. No more false hope, no more sitting around waiting. They had to save themselves or die trying. Others completely broke down. The thought that their families had already mourned them, already started moving on, was unbearable. So before we go any further, if you're enjoying this story and want to hear more insane survival tales like this, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next gets even more unbelievable. And trust me, you'll want to see how this actually ends. 27 people remained alive. They were literally watching their bodies consume themselves. At high altitude, your body burns through calories like crazy, just trying to maintain basic functions. Add in freezing temperatures, injuries, and the fact that they were trying to stay active, and their metabolism was in overdrive with nothing to fuel it. Here's what starvation actually looks like. First, your body burns through all your glycogen stores. The quick energy, that takes maybe a day. Then it starts on your fat reserves. Sounds fine, except most of these guys were athletes with low body fat to begin with. After that, your body starts eating your muscles. You get weaker every single day. Your brain gets foggy. Your immune system shuts down. Wounds stop healing. And eventually, your organs start failing because there's nothing left to burn. Roberto Canessa, a 19-year-old medical student, understood the science. Without food, they had maybe 2 more weeks before they were too weak to do anything, including save themselves. The bodies of their friends and teammates were right there, preserved perfectly by the snow and ice, frozen solid, and Canessa suggested the unthinkable. The survivors held a meeting. Can you imagine that conversation? Sitting in a wrecked airplane fuselage, huddled together for warmth, discussing whether you're going to eat your dead friends. Some of them were deeply religious. They worried about eternal damnation. Others argued this was no different than organ donation. Your friend's heart could save someone's life in a transplant. Why was this any different? In the end, they made a pact. If you die, the others can use your body to survive. Everyone agreed because the alternative was everyone dying. It was the waiting. Knowing that any minute you'd have to act on it. Knowing that once you crossed that line, you could never go back. Here's how they did it. They used shards of glass from the broken windows. Some used razor blades they found in luggage. They made small cuts in the frozen flesh, trying not to look at faces. One survivor said his hand wouldn't obey at first. His brain was screaming at him to stop, but his stomach was screaming louder. He had to make a conscious effort to force his arm to move, his mouth to open, his throat to swallow. The first day, they felt like the most miserable people on Earth. Some survivors could only manage to eat skin and fat at first. Others couldn't keep anything down. Your body's gag reflex isn't just psychological. Your digestive system has to figure out what to do with human tissue. It's similar enough to other meat that it works, but different enough that your body initially rejects it. But here's what nobody tells you about survival. You adapt. By the second day, eating had become routine. Not pleasant, not enjoyable, but routine. They dried the meat in the sun to make it easier to consume. The sun at that altitude is incredibly intense. UV radiation off the snow can burn you in minutes, but it also dehydrated the meat quickly, making it less revolting to eat. Eventually, they ate everything. Hearts, lungs, even brains. Your body doesn't care about taboos when it's starving. Eduardo Strauch, one of the survivors, said something interesting years later. His mind was fine with it. He processed the logic, understood the necessity, had no moral crisis, but his body rejected it initially. First time he tried to eat, he vomited. Then his body figured it out. Survival instinct overrode everything else. Another survivor, Pedro Algorta, described it as responding to their stomachs, not their minds. They weren't making a rational decision. They were just filling themselves with something, anything to stop the weakness. The psychology gets even stranger. They developed rules. No one was allowed to eat their own family members. They wouldn't take from certain bodies, protecting some out of respect. They prayed before and after. They maintained these little bits of humanity, these arbitrary lines that separated them from complete savagery. Looking back, those rules probably saved their sanity. On October 29th, day 17 of their ordeal, things got catastrophically worse. They were resting in the fuselage when an avalanche hit. A wall of snow came roaring down the mountain, burying the plane, filling the interior. 8 more people died, suffocated in their makeshift shelter. The avalanche happened at night. Most survivors were asleep. Suddenly, tons of snow crashed through the opening they'd been using as a door. The fuselage filled completely in seconds. People were screaming, but the screams were muffled by snow. Some survivors clawed their way toward what they thought was up, only to find more snow. Others were trapped under bodies, under debris, unable to move. The remaining 19 survivors were trapped in a space designed for maybe 4 people, wedged between packed snow and the bulkhead. They spent 3 days tunneling out, 3 days in near-complete darkness, barely able to breathe, with bodies around them. The carbon dioxide built up. They were literally suffocating slowly. Some passed out multiple times. They took turns digging with their bare hands, passing snow backward person by person. When they finally broke through, they found a landscape completely transformed. The avalanche had changed everything. What little shelter they'd built was destroyed. The supplies they'd organized were buried. And worst of all, 8 more friends were dead. The only food option now was the corpses buried with them in the snow. Roberto Canessa later said it was the most humiliating thing he'd ever done. Not the first time they ate. This, trapped underground, eating in the dark, knowing this was the only way to buy enough time to tell his mother he was still alive. That's what survival does. It strips away every pretense of dignity and leaves you with one question: do you want to live? And speaking of wanting to live, if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because we're about to get into the absolutely insane 10-day trek that 2 of these guys made through the Andes to save everyone else. And it's legitimately one of the craziest things you'll ever hear. By early December, around 19 people remained alive. They knew rescue wasn't coming. If they wanted to live, they had to save themselves. 3 men volunteered: Nando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin. They were called the Expeditionaries. And here's the dark logic of survival. The group gave these 3 men larger portions of food, not out of favoritism, out of necessity. They needed the Expeditionaries strong enough to walk out and bring back help. Think about that decision. You're starving, every cell in your body is screaming for food, and you're giving your share to someone else because you understand that's your only chance. That's not heroism in the movie sense, that's cold, practical math. And it worked because everyone bought into it. They prepared for weeks, made a sleeping bag from the insulation of the airplane's fuselage, used electrical wire to stitch it together, waterproofed it with fabric from the plane's air conditioning unit. They filled rugby socks with human flesh to eat during the journey. Pedrito later said packing those socks was surreal, just casually loading up provisions for a mountain trek, except your provisions are your dead teammates. On December 12th, they set out. What they thought would be a 1-day climb to see green valleys took 3 days just to reach the ridge. Parrado climbed to the summit and his heart sank. Everywhere he looked, more snow-covered mountains, no valleys, no civilization. Just endless white peaks stretching to the horizon. He said later that moment almost broke him, the realization that they'd prepared for the wrong journey, but they had committed. Turning back meant everyone died. After 3 days, they sent Vizintin back. 2 men could go farther on limited rations than 3. Parrado and Canessa continued. For 10 days, they climbed 839 meters up to a ridge at 14,774 feet, then descended 4,676 feet over 33 miles into Chile. They had no mountaineering experience, no equipment, no idea where they were going, just kept walking because stopping meant death. The trek itself deserves its own movie. They walked through snow up to their waist, slept huddled together in that makeshift sleeping bag, which barely kept them from freezing. They ate their provisions slowly, knowing once it ran out, they'd have nothing. At one point, Canessa wanted to turn back. Parrado refused. He told Canessa they were going forward, even if it meant crawling. Canessa lost half his body weight during those 72 days. When he was finally rescued, he weighed 44 kilograms, which is about 97 pounds. Think about that, a young athletic man reduced to basically skeletal remains, having just completed one of the most grueling treks in survival history. His body was eating itself to fuel the walk. Muscle, fat, everything was consumed to keep him moving. On December 20th, they spotted a Chilean shepherd named Sergio Catalan across a river. They tried to shout to him, but the water was too loud. The next day he came back and threw them a rock with a pen and paper tied to it. Parrado's hands were shaking so badly he could barely write. "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains. I am Uruguayan. We have been walking for 10 days. 14 friends remain on the plane. They are injured. Please help us. We can't walk anymore." He worried he wasn't even strong enough to throw the rock back across the river. He summoned every bit of remaining strength and hurled it. The rock bounced on the edge and rolled onto the bank. The shepherd read it, raised his hands like he understood, and rode for 10 hours to get help. That shepherd could have ignored them, could have thought they were crazy. Instead, he rode through the night to save them. So let's talk about what it was actually like. One survivor compared the taste to rice, bland, flavorless, just protein and fat your body needed. But the texture varied. The frozen meat required thawing, cutting with broken glass, often chewing for long periods. They avoided faces, couldn't bear to see who they were eating. They took from areas they could justify, like legs and arms. Some survivors described the first incision as the hardest moment of their lives, standing there on that mountain, piece of glass in hand, knowing what they were about to do. They cut through clothing first, peeling it back, then making small cuts in the flesh. Later, as desperation increased, they became more efficient, but that first day haunted them forever. The bodies were preserved perfectly by the cold, frozen solid, which actually made cutting difficult. They'd warm pieces by the sun, or sometimes against their own bodies, just to make it manageable. Nando Parrado specifically protected his mother's and sister's bodies so they wouldn't be eaten. That's the level of humanity they tried to maintain, even in the worst circumstances. His sister had survived the crash, but died on day 8. His mother died on day 8 as well. He made sure nobody touched them. December 22nd, 1972, helicopters finally arrived. The remaining 14 survivors were rescued over 2 days, bad weather delaying the second group. When they came down that mountain, the world went insane. International media swarmed them, and when the truth came out about how they survived, people lost their minds. Some people were horrified, called them savages, monsters, but here's what's interesting. The survivors weren't ashamed. They addressed the media as a team. Roberto Canessa said it perfectly. People who weren't there have no right to judge. The Pope expressed sympathy. The Church absolved them. Public opinion shifted from disgust to admiration once people understood the full story. One survivor compared their decision to the Eucharist. In communion, Christians symbolically eat the body and drink the blood of Christ. The survivors saw their choice the same way, an act of love and sacrifice. Their friends would have wanted them to live. Several survivors said they would have done the same if the situation was reversed, and they believed their friends would have made the same choice. Carlos Paez, another survivor, joked years later at their 50th reunion that he's condemned to tell this story forever, like the Beatles always having to sing Yesterday. But underneath the humor is a profound truth. These 16 people experienced something that redefined human survival. They proved that in the most desperate circumstances, humans will do literally anything to live. Would you have been an expeditionary? Would you have stayed back? Because this is the kind of story that makes you question everything you think you know about survival. The truth about plane crash survival is that no movie gets right. It's not glorious. It's not heroic in the traditional sense. It's desperate people making desperate choices and finding strength in the most horrifying circumstances imaginable. These survivors didn't become heroes because they were brave. They became heroes because they refused to die. So the next time you see a plane crash movie with its quick rescues and convenient food supplies, remember the reality. Men so hungry they tried to eat airplane seats. Men who made impossible choices and lived with them. Men who walked 10 days through mountains on frozen legs fueled by the bodies of their friends. That's not the story Hollywood usually tells, but it's the one that actually happened, and in its own dark way, it's far more extraordinary than any fiction, because it's a story about how human beings can find strength, cooperation, and even dark humor in the most desperate circumstances imaginable. Now, if you really enjoyed watching this video, then like it and consider subscribing to the channel, as we will be soon bringing up more anticipated and exciting content soon in this channel. I'll see you later.